Good morning, everybody. So we're in week 4 of this parenting class. I've really enjoyed, I say this every week, but I'm not a parent, but I've really enjoyed hearing from y'all and kind of seeing y'all reflect on your time as parents thus far and sort of thinking through how to continue being a parent. I think when I'm 24 and I call my mom a couple times a week, ask for advice and figuring out how to live life in the real world. So I can attest that just because your kids turn 24 does not mean you stop parenting them. And I would really like for my mom to remember that when I call her and at weird hours and don't know how to fix something in my house. But I've really enjoyed hearing y'all's expertise and your experience and sort of walking through this with y'all. And we're going to kind of pick up where we left off today. So we were watching through some of Andy Stanley's videos and we're halfway through one of them. Last week we had a pretty neat discussion about sort of setting a standard and setting like a precedent for what you want your household to look like and what you want your life to look like. And he talked a little bit about this idea of like setting up your kids to actually want to be around you when they're older and how you're building a relationship. You're not just there to be the disciplinarian. And he'll unpack that a little bit more today. So I'm excited to get into that. And this class, we haven't really spent too much time talking about the Bible and a Bible study because this has been sort of a practical class, but today he gets into a bit of a Bible study, which I appreciate. I think it's what we've talked about so far is that there's not a whole lot of great examples of parenting in the Bible and how in the very first family there was a murder almost immediately. So if you haven't had a murder in your family yet, you're doing great. You're better than God's original creation family. But we'll get into sort of Bible study on what love looks like and kind of what our hope as Christians is for a family. So any reflections on that before we move into this week's video? Anything stick out to you last week that as I was giving you that sort of quick rundown that you've noticed in your week?
That we need to pay more attention with our relationship with our child instead of the situation that's happening at that moment. So being able to fast forward 10 years and realize that that moment, the heat of the moment, is not as important as the long-term relationship that we are building with our children. So I need to remind myself to stay calm and not reactive in the heat of the moment, and remember that that is a building block and a teaching moment for my child. I loved his example of the church, you know, when he didn't go to church and his dad said, I'll let them parent their children and I'll parent mine. And Andy knew at that moment that his dad had his back over his reputation, that he chose his son over his reputation. And that is huge, you know, in this day and age where we care so much about what others think about our parenting because it's so out there on social media and all that. And we really just need to worry about our relationship, not about what society's thinking about our parenting. So.
Yeah. Well, I think that sets us up perfectly to kind of segue and jump back into the video. So thanks for that kind of reflection. And yeah, what we'll do is hear more from Andy Stanley, see what he's got teed up for us today. So we'll watch, today's clip is a little bit less than 10 minutes. Trying to keep it a reasonable amount. I know that I only have a short attention span on Zoom, so this is our attempt to have lots of things to share without kind of bombarding you with too much. So we'll stop at the 22-minute mark today.
Which is located in Greece. So for the remainder of our time today, we're going to focus our attention on just 3 words from 1 Corinthians. 3 words that summarize one facet of how love behaves and how love should behave at home. So here it is. You're familiar with this. Paul writes, love is love is. And again, this is not just any kind of love. This is the Jesus brand of love. This is the brand of love demonstrated by Jesus and the brand of love that Jesus followers are commanded to follow. Even his parent followers, even his step-parent followers. I mean, after all, you love your son, right? You love your daughter. Paul says love is patient. Patient. Why did he have to start there, right? And how did he know? I mean, one of my worst habits when our kids were young was I would say something like this to Sandra. I would say, so you're going to be gone in the morning, so you're going to need me to babysit, right? She'd say, no, you don't babysit, you parent. You're the parent. I'd be like, oh yeah, but it kind of feels like babysitting because it feels like an interruption. I had to stop. I had to slow down. I had to move at someone else's pace. That's what love required of me as a parent, because love isn't pushy, it's patient. And honestly, whenever I read this verse or think about this verse, I always think about this picture. This is a picture of Sandra's dad walking on the beach at Hilton Head, South Carolina with our middle child, Garrett, when he was obviously very young. Every time I look at this picture, I think two things. I think, number one, grandparents are more patient than parents. And the other thing I think about is this. What happens, think about it, what happens when we refuse to move at another person's pace? And this is Paul's point. Love chooses to move at the other person's pace rather than requiring that person to move at ours. And the reason this is so hard is because patience isn't natural. Your natural pace is natural. But here's Paul's point. Since God moved at our pace, we are to do the same for others. And we are to do the same for our children. If not, what happens? Literally, what happens? Think about it. If we insist on moving at our own pace, what happens? We separate ourselves. We separate ourselves from our children. Physically, when we're walking, but emotionally and relationally, when we push them beyond their capacity, we separate and we frustrate. It's interesting to me that the only specific thing, this is amazing, the only specific thing Paul says to parents about parenting is pertain to this very dynamic, and he directs it to, no surprise, to fathers. In a different letter, here's what he writes. He says, fathers, do not exasperate your children. Don't provoke them. Don't stir them up. Don't insist on winning. Don't insist on outsmarting, out-talking. Don't push too hard. Don't move too fast. He says, if you do, here's the end result. You will be separated. They will be discouraged. They'll be discouraged. They'll be disheartened. They eventually just lose motivation. They'll just stop because they can't keep up. And again, the result, separation. Again, how did Paul know? And how interesting, and yet maybe not surprising, that he didn't address this to moms and dads. Just me, just fathers. Love is patient. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. I understand this because I think and I thought the very same thing. You're thinking, but Andy, okay, look, Andy, that's great. I'm glad that's in the Bible. But if we don't push our kids, if we don't expect more of them than they expect of themselves, if we don't ensure they reach their maximum potential, then they may not turn out. To which I would say to you, turn out what? In fact, I'll finish the sentence for you. Then they may not turn out the way you want them to turn out. They may not become what you want them to become. So let's pause and think about this for a moment. Is that really what you want? Wouldn't it be better to discover what they were born to do, who they were born to be, and facilitate that? That's what great parents do. I have never met a father. I'm sure they're out there somewhere, but I've never met a father who wished he had been harder on his children. I've met plenty of fathers who have little to no relationship with their adult children because they were so insistent that their kids become what they failed to become themselves, or because they felt like their kids were going to fail to become what they had become. So inspire your kids, of course. Motivate, of course. Push to the point of exhaustion and frustration? No. Compare and shame? No. Because parents, that's about you. That's not about them. Let's not kid ourselves. Besides, this might help. Do you know what the number one predictor of relational and professional success is? The number one predictor, not just professional success. And again, as parents, sometimes we get really focused on that. But do you know what the number one predictor of both relational and professional success is? Self-awareness.
I'm stopping him there only because self-awareness takes a long time for him to get into, and we know what self-awareness is, and we could talk about that more. I have some sort of guiding questions if you need them, but what are your first thoughts? What came to mind as you watched that?
I love the comment about not putting the expectations on your kids, and and I thought that, I can't remember how he worded it. He said something like, it wouldn't turn out the way you want them to turn out, or something like that. And I'm thinking, as he's finishing the sentence, they're not going to turn out up to your expectations. I feel like that's how a lot of parents face it. And I think it's a struggle to let go enough to allow kids to become who they are, and knowing that we don't have any control over that, whether we try to exert it or not, and that the way they are, and the things that they're good at, and the things that they're interested in, are not necessarily the same things that we as parents like or enjoy or want to do or want them to do. But the good and loving and supportive thing is just to let them figure that out on their own.
I think it's interesting because even in school, not even with like all the extracurriculars, there's such a push, and it's not just the parents. I feel like it's the system to take all these high school classes in middle school, and then take all these AP classes in high school, and it boggles my mind because I have a child who did some of that and is already scheduled to graduate early from Clemson. And it's just like, why, to what end do we do all these things? And I feel like the parents get really caught up in, oh, well, I've got to take the AP bio, and I've got it. I mean, not I, but that's what it's saying. That's what they're saying. Right. And, as opposed to just these kids are all going to get into a college, and then they're all going to, most of them will. And it just seems like you're just running a race and putting them on this crazy path that they just can't breathe or look around or take a minute. Aaron, I'm curious what your thoughts are as a counselor. I mean, I'm sure you see this. It's just, but I feel like it's the system too that's making these kids this way. There weren't any high school classes offered in middle school when I was growing up, and I seem to have done okay. So it's just interesting.
Yeah, I definitely see a lot of it. I know when I was in middle school and high school, we went into high school, some of us with like 2 credits. That was it. Like, that was all you could do. I've got kids coming into high school already with like 5, 6, 7 credits. And I'm like, you're going to run out of classes by the time you graduate. And then we've got the parents who are, want to plan out every single class for 4 years when they come in, and there's pressure for right now we're, reworking how many AP classes we offer. Let's reward these kids for taking all these AP classes because it makes us look good, and, and that sort of thing. But when we have meetings, which we're actually getting ready to do, not this week, but next week, I always try to bring up to the kids, like, how much are you spending on homework? Like, what's your stress level like? Because we want you to challenge yourself, but we don't want you to spend hours and hours. So I always try to focus on the balance and make sure the parents are hearing that too. But luckily I also feel like there's this mental health awareness. So I do think I see more and more parents, realizing that it's more of the system, but they don't want their child caught up in that. So I think that's good.
I want to touch on what he said about the greatest predictor of success was self-awareness. And I think the fact that we are pushing our kids to take all of these academic courses, not that that's not important, but could we give them every year a course in social and emotional learning? Wouldn't that help them prepare? Wouldn't that help them be more self-aware? Wouldn't it help children to learn how to deal with their emotions? You know, as parents, we're always trying to Band-Aid. We don't want to see our children hurt. We hate to see them hurting. And so we rush in and put that Band-Aid on rather than saying, you know, pain is part of life and it's part of them growing. And I just feel like they learned, they head to college, and then what have they got? You know, they turn to things that aren't exactly healthy because they don't like feeling in pain. They don't like that uncomfortable feeling. So I have to strongly agree with Andy Stanley that self-awareness is something that needs to be taught and needs to be cultivated.
I think that point brings up something that he brought up at the very beginning of the clip we watched today, talking about moving at someone else's pace, of that awareness and what it would look like, what it looks like to be humble enough to move at someone else's pace, and what it looks like to have someone else move at your pace. I'd love to hear if you'll have any kind of reflections on what he brought up there.
You know, I remember when my kids were young and really needed me just to be with them, you know, like on a Saturday or something like that. It was a little bit of a relief from the work world, you know, to be able to be dedicated to that and to realize, you know, there's nothing I can be doing today other than this, you know, watching these children, you know, and taking care of them. This thing that, I'll be quick. I just wanted to go back to the topic right before we change to this one. Parents feel so much pressure to be doing all these things for their children. You know, we're talking about, you know, letting them become themselves, or letting them turn out to be the way we want them to be versus the way they're going to turn out to be normally. That's not easy to see. I mean, to figure out how, because, you know, they may not take advantage of all the things that we can offer them. If we don't put a lot of things in front of them, they may, and kid down the street, you know, is going to this summer camp, or is in this enrichment program, or is doing this or that, and you feel like maybe I'm not doing everything I should. So it's not always wanting them to be what we want them to be. There's just so many options that you feel pressure not to. I mean, I became a lawyer. I in no way ever encouraged any of my children to become lawyers, and none of them are. But I wanted them to be the best they could be and have all these options for themselves. So it's hard to know when you have all these peer pressure. And I don't really mean people pushing you to do it because they, you know, but that's just your own self perception is I've got to give my kid everything I can, you know, to make them succeed. You know, whereas if they grew up on a farm, you know, milking the cows and helping with the crops without all these special enrichment opportunities, they'd probably be fine anyway. Anyway, it's just hard. It's a hard parental path to follow.
I want to ask a question, and Greta, I don't mean to put you on the spot, and you can follow up maybe later if you don't have an answer right away, but I'm really interested in this self-awareness thing as the parent of a 12-year-old in the height of adolescence, and, you know, and that's a time when you are figuring out a lot about yourself, and, you know, just how you relate to the world and who you really are and all of those kinds of things. What are like the top 2 or 3 things that parents can do to help cultivate that self-awareness? Like how, what are things we can say, or how can we react or talk through stuff in order to really be supportive of that journey or that kind of discovery period in our kids' lives.
You know, Catherine, I think one of the first things we need to do is build a vocabulary for emotions. It's amazing. You think that's such a simple thing, but honestly, I have a client that's in college, and I ask her, let's talk about some of the negative emotions that you feel. And she says, what are emotions? Like, she's just couldn't do that. I mean, and I know that that's surprising. She's a very intelligent young lady, but I think building awareness of feelings, giving vocabulary to it, and then modeling. We need to be vulnerable with our kids. We need to admit when we're in pain. You know, talk to them, model, show them, you know, that this is a tough situation right now. You know, model being calm. Go ahead and cry in front of your kids if you need to. I think it teaches them that it's okay to have negative emotions. Model how you act when you're angry. Say, I was so angry that such and such happened, but you're not cursing, you're not slamming doors, you're not screaming, you're just talking about it. So those are just some ideas off the top of my head. I'm happy to talk with you down the road anytime.
No, that's really helpful. And it's interesting that you say that. I remember, because that's something I probably, the second thing is something I probably don't do really good is model different emotions and stuff. Because I remember when my daughter was, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years old, and one of our dogs died, and I just cried. You know, I just cried and cried and cried. And somebody asked us if, you know, a week or two later, it was at church actually, somebody said, you know, are you guys doing okay? I know that was really tough. And my daughter said, oh, that was a crying day. And I realized, like, she'd never seen me cry before. That was never part of, you know, anything that she had ever witnessed. And that really made a huge impact on her. And so I've tried to be better. You know, I'm aware of that over the years, and I try to be better about it, but I still think that's somewhere I could work. So I appreciate that. That's really helpful.
You know, my parents, both of whom I love dearly, my mother's still alive, my father's passed away, but when I was, you know, growing up, and of course this is in a different era where parents and children were, you know, like parents didn't show themselves to children as much as far as revealing themselves. But you know, my mother would always say, if you complain, she said, oh, buck up, count your blessings. You know, there are children in Africa who don't have food to eat, you know, so that showing any kind of negative emotion, she felt like she had to be a cheerleader to push you past that, you know. And, you know, that I don't blame her for that, because she came through a very hard upbringing with a dead mother and stepmother and all this stuff. She came through hard times when she was growing up. But she didn't want people to dwell on anything negative, and so she wanted everything to be positive. That's okay, but it's not really the real world.
So I think what we're talking about now sort of ties into how he opened this clip from this morning, talking about love is patient. Because I think you can be frustrated and be patient, and you can be angry and be patient, or you can be sad and annoyed and not be patient at all and sort of completely forget about it, and it goes out the window. You want to dive into that some of sort of what patience looks like and what it means for that to be the call to parents, is to be patient, call for all of us as Christians to be patient? Easier said than done.
I don't really know Stacy very well, but I know that she and Brian have a special needs child. And I imagine that they've had to try to learn this thing about different pace you know, that you need to go at a different pace, particularly with a child like that. And the whole idea of being on your own schedule, you know, patience, he said, is going at somebody else's schedule. That's pretty important, I think.
You're muted, Stacey.
Mute.
Stacey, you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Oh yes, I'm so bad at this. I said that we are not the poster parents sometimes when it comes to showing Mary patience. But you know, I think we do the best we can. But I do think that having her has given our whole family a unique perspective on things. But as far as patience, I think, and I was going to say this along with self-awareness, they kind of go together. So I feel like Brian and I have done a decent job of really encouraging Emma and Sam to handle their own business. And we are patient enough to try and let them, you know, we'll encourage them and talk them through it, but we're not going to go to the teacher for them or go to the coach for them. You know, we've encouraged them to speak up for themselves. And I think that goes a huge way in them being very self-aware and very confident. They get feedback directly from whoever it is that they're having some kind of, you know, and it's not always an issue either. I mean, sometimes it's positive going and talk, but they need, but it's important, I think, for them to have the skills. And some of that is a function of us having another child in the home. You know, sometimes they, you know, like I've said before, it's every man for themselves. I mean, we all do the best we can, but, you know, we've always encouraged them to really be aware that they control. I mean, they're in control. I mean, it's their life and we are here to guide them. And they have, you know, with prayer and talking to us, I mean, they have all the abilities they need. And they're a little bit older, but I definitely think we started certainly when they were probably 12 or 13 years old, you know, encouraging them to go that direction.
When you talk about love as patient and going at somebody else's pace, when you do that, you model that other person is important, and you model that you're not self-absorbed and it's not all about you. And now, this is just an observation. This is not by any means what I practiced, but I certainly try to do this. But you know, if you're selfish, then it's all about you and you're going at your own pace, even if you have other people in tow. But if you're practicing what Andy Stanley was talking about and what Paul is talking about, and love is patient, love is kind, then you go at somebody else's pace. That shows them that they're important, and it shows them empathy. And if we can do that on a regular basis, then they develop their own sense of empathy and helps them model that other people are important too, and it's not all about them. And I think that's very important in today's society, when a lot of the children these days have the feelings of entitlement and that it's all about them. If we can model that it's not all about them, it's all about other people, then that sets a good example.
I agree, James. I'm thinking about, Stacey, your point about not doing everything for our kids and letting them experience things and learn how to do things on their own. I just want to recommend a book that's hot off the press that I just ordered. It's called The Scaffolding Effect. And it's exactly what you're saying. We don't do everything for our children. Think of them as the building. We're the scaffolding. We're that part which supports them and guides them. So that's very important in building self-awareness and also just building confidence. If we're constantly doing things for them, they don't feel that they can do it for themselves, and that's their self-esteem. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah, I have a book that I read. It's a little bit older, but it's called Mega Skills. Someone at school recommended it, and it's like age by age, like household chores and, you know, just things that like that kids can learn to be responsible for. And so as much as possible, I've been trying to let them just do little things around the house. And it's hard because so much faster and better if I just do it. And my mom did that. And like, I went off to college not knowing how to do laundry, not, you know, and so I don't want my kids to be in that same position. So it's really, really hard, and I have to sometimes just let it go. But I figure in the long run, they will be better off.
We made Emma and Sam start doing their laundry in high school. I haven't, every once in a while, I'll fold a load if I come across it. Now that means at 11:30 at night, Sam might be waking me up doing his wash when he realizes he doesn't have any clean clothes for tomorrow. But at least I know that they'll always have some clean clothes and know how to get there. But that wasn't a function of me trying to be a good parent. That was just me just being done. Like, I'm tired of all these clothes. You people are old enough to do your own. So anyway, I'm glad to know that I helped them in that small sense.
Well, I think that gets to sort of a point that he started to make that I think he's been making sort of under the current of what he's been saying of treating your kids like people. You know, they're not eternal helpless beings. They certainly may be, but at times. But I think, like, you do make laundry. Like, your clothes get dirty. That someone has to clean them. It's not always me. I'm not a laundry machine. But I think he's talked a lot about that, of like respecting your kids and kind of, do you want them to be your friend later when they're adults? And do you want them to come to you when they have a problem? Do you want them to see you as someone who can help and is a resource? Or, you know, we talked a little bit about not being your kid's best friend always, and you do have to, there's a little bit of a boundary, but I think what you're talking about gets to that. Treating them like real, full-blown, made in the image of God. So what's the takeaway for this week?
I'm convicted of patience, and the fact that that's first in that little list, and that's the one that I'm worst. You know, when you're talking about doing your own laundry and doing, I'm better with my third. I let him, see, I'm so controlling over all that because it's my area and I want it to be clean and I want it to be done right. And I have to work on letting them do that. But I get so impatient when the clothes are left in the dryer, say, for 3 days without folding them until they absolutely need to wear them. Then they look for them. Things like that, and just need to know that I'm preparing them for life skills. And yeah, the patient thing and knowing that I can probably do it faster and more efficient is an issue. So if you have young kids, just, gosh, let them do everything. I think, Stacy, that's fantastic what y'all have done, either out of need or whatever, but your kids are ready for life. I mean, I have two, one out of college and one in college. And I'd say laundry, you know, keeping your place clean and cooking for yourself and all that are things they need to know before they go. They don't learn it, you know, just by getting there. So make sure that they know those life skills, even if it means a lot of impatience and wringing your hands, and just keep that to yourself. So that's what I got from today.
This thing that Stacy said about we're not going to go to the teacher for them, we're not going to go to the coach for them. That's really huge. That's something that I remember in my prior life when my kids were young, and I was married to somebody else than I'm married to now. She would always say, I'm going to call the principal about this, or I'm going to talk to the coach about this. And it was well-intentioned, but, you know, let the kid work it out on their own. And even going to the principal is not the right person, the person, not the principal. But doing so many things for them, I'm totally guilty of violating that all the way down the line. And I can only say that Stacy and Bryant got it right at an earlier stage than I did.
Yeah, I think one of the main things is that, you know, we're there to guide our kids and support them, but we have to let them come to things, you know, on their own timeline. They've got their own like rate of growth and maturity and things like that. And they're their own people, you know, as much as we might want them to be, you know, a straight A student or, you know, the best soccer player ever, you know, our kid might be an artist, you know. So I think letting go of those expectations and following their lead more, as hard as that can be.
And I think not always expecting them to do things the way that we're going to do them. I mean, it's like Graham, my husband. I mean, he says, I'm going to help you by feeding the birds. Well, I'm out there going, wait a minute, don't do it this way. You know, that's what I'm talking about. Just let them do it. If they don't fold exactly right, you know, then let them fold them the way they want to. They'll learn, oh, they kind of get wrinkled this way. Just giving them the space to make mistakes.
Well, thanks as always for a great conversation. I'm going to call us for time, but yeah, I think this has been, I've really enjoyed watching these videos. We have a couple, we're about halfway through the series that he did, so there's more to come. He has lots of great to say. I think next week we'll dive a little bit more into the rest of that 1 Corinthians letter, considering all we got was love is patient, and I'm sure many of us can finish finish that list. It goes for quite a long time longer. But I'm looking forward to next week, and glad that we can kind of meet on Zoom and meet in kind of real time, and also be able to meet later and post on YouTube and this whole new world of technology that we're in 2020, 2021. To close our time together, would someone like to close us in prayer and send us off into a new week of parenting?
I will.
Thank you, Stacy.
The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Heavenly Father, please help us this week as we walk along the journey. Help us to always be mindful that you are with us. Help us in our parenting to be mindful of what's best for our children and not really what's best for them in the eyes of the world. We really just need to please God and help us, Lord, just raise self-aware children. Help us to find patience to allow our children to gain that self-awareness and us to guide them in that journey. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Well, thanks for joining us this week, and I will see you all next week.